Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Before we begin this episode, I want to alert you that my latest book is now available in both print and ebook formats. The title is Love American Style, and it is a collection of short stories about men, women, their passions, and their dysfunctions. There's a short link in the episode notes that will take you to my Amazon profile page, where all 4 of my books are listed, 3 novels in this new short story collection. Again, the title of the new one is Love American Style, named after the TV series that ran from 1969 until 1974. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Edinburg, Scotland novelist Rosie Walker, the author of psychological thrillers, her latest being My Husband's Ex. Just that title opens up so many possibilities and so much trepidation. That alone, just the title, sets you right up. Rosie Walker is the author of 3 other novels as well. Beyond My Husband's Ex, she's also written The Baby Monitor, The House Fire, and Secrets of a Serial Killer. Another one with a title that sets you right up there. She gained a master's in creative writing with distinction from the University of Edinburg in 2011. She also has an undergraduate degree in psychology from Lancaster University. She lives in Edinburg with her husband, Kevin, their daughter, Elsie, and their dog, Bella. Rosie Walker, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to hear a Scottish accent, and it's great to talk to somebody who's so deep into the some of the weird things that happen with the human mind and human consciousness. Let's start by having you tell us about your latest novel. Your latest novel is My Husband's Ex. Again, it opens up all kinds of possibilities. Give us a sketch of the novel. What's it really? What can you tell us without spoiling it for the grand finale?
So My Husband's Ex follows a family, a mum, a dad, and their 2 children who are spending Christmas in a remote lodge in the Scottish Highlands. And they go there to relax and to kind of have their atmospheric Christmas. And just as they arrive and they're unpacking everything and getting settled in, there's a knock at the door. And when they open the door, it is the husband's ex-girlfriend, who just walks right in and thanks him for inviting her. And from there, everything kind of spirals out of control. They have no idea why she's there. She's called Alice, the ex-girlfriend, why Alice is there and what she wants and what she will do to get what she wants. And there's a big storm and everyone gets trapped inside the remote lodge, and chaos ensues.
Wow. So she shows up. I'm assuming the husband's saying, I never invited her. She's just showing up. She's crashing our time, correct?
That's right. Yeah, he has no idea why she's there, and he seems pretty genuine when his wife Sadie asks him, why is she here? Why is she saying that you've invited her? And he's completely baffled. He has no idea why.
What got you onto psychological thrillers? There's a lot of different genres. Psychological thrillers is a great category that attracts a lot of readers. But obviously, you felt an affinity for psychological thrillers and the human pathology, mental pathologies. What got you onto it?
Funnily enough, when I first started writing my debut novel, I didn't really know where it fit genre-wise. I had to ask my publisher after I'd been offered the deal what genre they were envisaging it fitting in, because I'd always been very, very interested in the workings of the human brain and what happens when it goes a little bit wrong, which is why I'd studied psychology in my undergraduate degree. And then that kind of deviated into being quite interested in serial killers, I think mainly because I still don't really understand what happens in a person's mind to cause them to do things that horrific to other human beings. It's completely unfathomable to me. So I spent a lot of time reading about the serial killers and trying to understand. And then often I find that I can kind of work my way into understanding something if I write about it, particularly if I write about it through in the voice of somebody who is in that scenario that I don't understand. And so I started writing something in the voice of a serial killer. And that was how my first novel, Secrets of a Serial Killer, was born, because there are sections in that book that are in the voice of a serial killer. But I think that book it's a little bit more horror than psychological thriller. It kind of straddles the two genres. I think a lot of writers early in their career, before they're published, kind of don't really necessarily write to a specific genre. But after writing Secrets of a Serial Killer, I felt a little bit like I didn't want to spend any time with serial killers anymore. They were a little bit too scary for me and a little bit too unpleasant, and found myself being drawn more and more to domestic settings, because I think there's a lot to explore there with families and the way that families treat each other. And I think people within families can do some really strange and sometimes horrible things to each other. And I started exploring that from different angles, and that became my second book. And I think, and that one has an arsonist character. So you see, like, there's a little shift with each book away from the horror of serial killers towards the kind of more relatable and more kind of this could happen to anyone feel of the third and fourth book that I published, The Baby Monitor and My Husband's Ex, which are a lot more kind of domestic and a lot more psychological thriller than horror. So it's been a little journey, and I think I found where I'd like to be now, which is definitely in the domestic psychological thriller sphere. And I probably won't write about a serial killer again. I'd never say never, because they are still fascinating, but I quite like the domestic setting for the stories that I'm telling. And I do really like the way that a reader can pick up a psychological thriller book and quite often feel this is a scenario that could happen to anybody.
Right.
And
Yeah. Well,
there's
they're reading it.
something,
You want them to get up and lock the door and make sure the windows are shut fast and and so
yeah.
on. Because it's like this is not far-fetched. This could happen to me. Tell us about the baby monitor. Give us a sketch of that one.
So the Baby Monitor is about a mum who's just given birth to her second baby. And in the aftermath of her first baby's birth, she suffered from quite severe postnatal psychosis, and she'd had to receive inpatient treatment for that. So she's understandably quite worried about the impact of having a second baby will have on her mental health. But she feels okay. You know, she brings, the book opens and she's bringing her new baby home from the hospital. But on that first night back from the hospital, she switches on the baby monitor and she hears a voice speaking to her daughter, her older daughter, through the baby monitor, telling her daughter, Olivia, your mummy doesn't love you. And when she tells her husband about this, he doesn't believe her. He believes that she might be beginning to suffer from postnatal psychosis again. And as whoever it is that is watching her and her children through the baby monitor escalates their actions, it makes her look more and more like she is imagining it, and nobody believes her.
Wow, what a nightmare scenario that is. Yeah, wow. So your ideas come from where? Are they torn from the pages of exotic stories from newspapers? Are they imagined? Are they strictly products of your imagination? Where do you think your ideas come from?
All sorts of different places. So the baby monitor actually came from a collection of news stories, like you said. I think quite a lot of ideas of mine come from news stories, and I'd seen a series of articles in online articles from news sources of recorded footage from people's Wi-Fi baby monitors showing people, like strangers, trying to talk to these children, like screaming and disturbing them, waking them up from their sleep, just to really screw around with these families. And it was really quite freaky that to see that footage. And I ended up contacting quite an influencer who had quite a large following, and just said, like, have you heard about, have any of your followers or have you talked to anybody who's experienced this baby monitor hacking happening? Because that's really fascinating and I'd quite like to explore it a bit more. And she shut me down straight away. And she basically was like, it doesn't really happen. It's a myth. And it's a dangerous myth to perpetuate because people are switching off their baby monitors when they need to be able to see their children. And she just completely shut me down. And I remember thinking at the time, like, how would I feel if I had experienced that, if I had heard a voice speaking to my child, or if I had seen the baby monitor camera like swiveling around the room following me, and someone told me it was made up, and like how that would feel horrible. That would be quite scary. And that was the beginning of the baby monitor. It was like two separate incidents. The news story and the influencer kind of shutting me down that I knitted together into an idea, and that was how that one was born. And then my husband's ex actually began in a completely different way, and it had been a short story from years before that I'd written when I was doing the masters at the University of Edinburgh, and it was about a man who bumped into his ex-girlfriend on the street, but she was homeless and she was begging, and he saw her, and he just didn't know what to do because seeing like your first love in a scenario that you just could not fathom them being in, he just carried on walking and walked straight past her. And it wasn't a psychological thriller story, but it just that image of somebody in that moral dilemma of, can I help her? Should I help her? Why is she here? What can I do? And then just being so paralyzed by the force of that experience that they just do nothing. Really stuck with me for like 10 years, and then ended up being an opening scene of a very, very early draft of My Husband's Ex. And then in the edits, it completely got changed, and that scene doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, it's strange how things can change so much from the idea concept, like the conception of the idea, to the actual delivery of it. Completely different.
Now, you have an undergraduate degree in psychology. How much, I mean, do you feel your psychology degree and training come into play when you're researching and writing your books?
Quite a bit, I would say. I tend not to write about people's mental illnesses in my books because I think I find it most interesting to write about the everyman, somebody who could be anybody. And I also don't want to make a mental illness entertainment, if you see what I mean. Because for a lot of people, it's their everyday life and they're living with that. And I don't know, it's not my place to decide whether that's something scary or thrilling. But the way that people's minds work and the different kind of types of people that are out there, particularly, I think is quite fashionable at the moment to write about things like narcissists and psychopaths, but kind of covert psychopaths who are just living among us pretending to be like normal people, and that kind of thing, I think is very interesting. And I think certainly my psychology degree introduced me to concepts that I would not be as familiar with now had I not done that degree. But a lot of it is just being really interested in people, and I think I could write the books that I write now without having that psychology degree.
Now, there's people who will read cross genres, feeling like I want input from other genres. I don't want to just be, wed to my own genre in terms of the input that I get. On the other hand, you might be reading a lot of psychological thrillers so that you understand what your competition is and to seek to differentiate yourself a little bit. What about that? How familiar are you with the psychological thriller genre written by other authors? I know there's a lot of them out there, so impossible to keep up with all of it. But do you seek to differentiate yourself in any kind of way, or do you just figure this is, I've got my channel, I'm going to pursue it, and it's working so far, so all good?
I do read a lot of psychological thrillers, and I try to turn off the writer part of my brain while I'm doing it, but it's really hard to do. So I do find myself kind of spotting different techniques that the writers have used, and particularly like things like the midpoint twist that happens around 50%, where you really find out a massive secret is usually revealed around that point. And I'm always kind of looking at the percentage on my Kindle as I'm getting to the middle, being like, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? How are they going to do it? What about what I've just read right now is going to be completely flipped on its head? And have I predicted it? And do you know what? I very, very rarely do manage to predict it, because even though I write them and I read a lot of them, I think I think there's so many really good writers that are doing so much good work to confound the reader. So yeah, I think it's a tricky one to unpick these things. And what I have done, I have taken a very, very popular psychological thriller novel and plotted each chapter into a spreadsheet to really, really pull apart the work that the author's doing, because I thought it was so good. I wanted to know, like, where are all these twists? How are they foreshadowed? Where are the hints? Like, how many hints has this author done before the reveal? You know, and the kind of really forensically took it apart, because I just admired it so much. It was a really interesting exercise. But I don't think that kind of thing impacts the way that I write my own stuff, because I think every writer is different, and I think you've got to be true to your own style and interests. And I think if you were to be overly inspired or influenced by another writer, I don't think you'd be writing true to yourself. And I think it would actually be harder to write like that than it would be
Right.
just to follow your own instincts.
Yeah. Why a spreadsheet? Why did you use a spreadsheet to do the analysis?
um,
I mean, how does that work? Because I mean, there's with a spreadsheet, I'm assuming it's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can open different, I forget what they call them, basically different pages on it. How does that work?
yeah, so I would do a row for each chapter, and then in the first column there would be like a couple of sentences that would summarize what was happening in that chapter, and then the next column would be next field in the field in the next column along would be like my breakdown of what work that chapter was doing. So whether there was a reveal, whether there was a twist, whether there was a twist that was a reveal, like whether there's a clue, whether there's a promise to the reader that something's going to be resolved later, you know, that kind of thing. And like really pinpointing what was happening and where, so that eventually, by the time you've kind of populated the spreadsheet and each row is a different chapter, you can really get a big picture overview of where the big plot points sit within the structure, and really see the bones of a book, because books are long. It takes a long time to get through a book, and when you're in it, it's hard to see the big picture and really step back. But by plotting it into a spreadsheet like that and really breaking it down into really simple beats, I find that to be a really interesting exercise. So that's how I use a spreadsheet for that kind of thing. I've only done that
Interesting.
once though, just to somebody's novel. I'm not like a crazy person with like 57 spreadsheets for every psychological thriller that I've
Pinned
ever
up
written.
on the wall.
Yeah, yeah. String
So,
connecting them all.
how much plotting do you do? Do you do a lot of heavy plotting? Outlining is maybe the better term I should use, or do you like kind of the light outline and allow for more organic type of writing? What is your method?
I am definitely a plotter, and I do plot in quite a lot of detail. Um, I end up I tend to do a chapter plan using an Excel spreadsheet again.
Mhm.
Um, similar to how I just described, with like a row for each chapter. Um, and that enables me, because I feel that psychological thrillers are quite meticulous in how reader expectations for structure, and to an extent publisher expectations for structure too. You know, you've got to have a really exciting opening chapter that really pulls the reader in. And then you've got to have your inciting incident quite early on in the novel. And then you've got to have twists and reveals spaced out pretty regularly. And then you've got to have the midpoint twist that I mentioned just earlier about like where everything gets turned on its head and the reader's expectations are completely flipped. And then you've got to have like a big rising action right to the end. And your twists and reveals continue. And then you've got to have a big twist at the end that kind of flips everything around again. And all of that I find the writing process and the editing process much easier if I know what those things are and when they're coming before I sit down to write. Because if I haven't done those things, if I haven't plotted them out, the likelihood of me finding a stumbling block that means that I don't get to write the end because I've been distracted or because I got stuck or because I've kind of written myself into a corner, it's much higher a likelihood. And I don't want to give up on a book if I can help it. So it's a security policy almost on my writing, is doing a really detailed chapter plan.
Let me ask you about this statement you make on your website. You say you write that your master's in creative writing taught you the ins and outs of structure, pace, plot, and conflict. Talk about pacing, because I think that's maybe perhaps the most overlooked aspect of fiction writing, but it's so important when you read a really well-crafted novel. The pacing is one of the things that really stands out. How do you approach, and I would imagine that with thriller novels, pacing is especially important where you're going to deliver some of the big plot points. How do you approach and control the pacing?
I feel it's very important that every scene has an element in it that progresses the plot, and ideally that advances your understanding of the characters within the book. Or one or the other, or both, preferably both. And I found this, I read this article once about, funnily enough, Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. And what it said basically is the pacing of that novel is incredibly, incredibly good. You can say what you like about the quality of the writing or anything like that, but this article said, like, you open Twilight at any page, and when you look at that page, there's something exciting happening on that page. And that to me is kind of exemplifies pace for a psychological thriller in particular, is that readers want to be excited. They want to be thrilled. They want danger and threat all around the corner at every point. And if you've got a page that's outlining, your character getting ready for work and putting on their makeup and brushing their hair, and then they get in the car and they go to work and they have a normal day at work and then they come home again, that's going to be a very, very slow paced book, and your reader's not going to keep reading. And but then again, there are psychological thrillers that have much slower paces than is kind of typical or traditional, like the new I think it's Chris Whitaker's All the Colors of the Dark. It's quite long, it's quite slow, but it's beautifully written and there's so much happening, and it kind of defies all expectations of the genre and surpasses them. So it's not, there are no hard and fast rules, and excellent writers can break those rules all the time very successfully. But I tend to try very hard to have a real snappy pace, and for me, that is something exciting happening as often as possible, and everything has to contribute to the plot.
Interesting. So, when did you, actually, before I ask you when you started writing and when you got interested in writing, I'm curious what characteristic you possess that you think really lent yourself to writing, or a particular characteristic that really was one that was indispensable for your ability to write at the level you do. Could you identify that particular characteristic in yourself? Obviously, you possess many, but is there one that is standout that, if it wasn't for this, if I wasn't this way, I wouldn't be nearly as effective at what I do?
Ooh, I like that question. That's I've got to think about that. I think maybe determination, because I think I decided that I was going to be a writer when I was about like 8 or 9 years old. But it was another 20 years before I actually properly started to write in a way that would lead to me being published. And I spent a lot of those 20 years talking about it and thinking about it and not actually doing it and feeling very ashamed of that as well and guilty. And then one day I realized that how bad I would feel about myself if I had never managed to get to the end, had never managed to finish the first draft of a book. And the feeling, I wanted to avoid that feeling of almost guilt that I would have pushed upon myself if I had just continued to talk about it and not actually do it. And I became very determined to finish a first draft. And then when I got to the end of
at what age was that? I mean, you started getting it. You decided you want to be a writer at 8 or 9 years old. When did you have the revelation that, or just that decision that you were going to be determined and finish it? Were you actually that young, or was that a little bit later in life?
that was a lot later. That was after the masters. That was because even I did the masters in creative writing, and I still hadn't finished a book while I was doing that, and didn't for a good few years after
What
graduating.
held back your progress in terms of, was it simply I mean, all writers experience this. It's difficult to sit down because you don't know what you're going to produce. And if you don't produce well that day, it's going to be a lousy day. You're going to feel bad about yourself. And what am I doing this for? Sort of thing. I don't know if you experience that. Not every writer experiences it that way, that they feel that it's just hard to sit down and get going. So what happened at that point? I mean, you mentioned that you realized, hey, look, I'm not making, what was retarding your progress is really what I'm asking.
Mm. A lot of things. I think part of it was that I didn't really understand structure and plot. I had studied them to an extent while I was at university, but I think I learned about them from a literary fiction and short story perspective, and we didn't study a lot of genre fiction on the masters, so I didn't know about kind of what people expected from a psychological thriller. And I also didn't plot my novels out. So, or I did, but maybe they didn't have the arc that you would expect from a novel. I wasn't writing things that I was finding interesting. I was trying to write literary fiction. And also I think genuinely that it's really hard to be creative in your spare time when there are a few things in your life that you don't feel are sorted. And I think those are things like your job, because you've got to have a day job before even after you're published in a lot of cases. Yeah. So your job, your kind of home life, and your kind of social life, I think, are three things that if you're kind of struggling with one of those or all of those, you don't have that much free headspace to be creative. And I'd had jobs that were very draining mentally. And I would get home from work and I would just be done for the day. I didn't want to sit in front of a computer again.
Right.
And I had
Yeah.
and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was 5,000 miles away in California, and we were struggling with how to be in the same country and visas and things like that. So that was incredible amount of kind of mental load in my day-to-day life, was just trying to work out how to do that and find a way to be together. And I think until those things got sorted out, I didn't want to come home from work and write. I just wanted to, slump or go to the pub with my friends and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that. And I think,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I was just going to add that there are writers who will do physical things for their profession because they're ready for the mental activity once they get home. But that's a major issue because a lot of times writers are white collar workers. They're using their brain. And then, as you say, you go home and now you're supposed to activate your brain again after it's been really been producing a lot of output all day. But I'm sorry, I cut you off. Finish that thought.
no, totally. I think that actually links in with what I was going to say next, which is that I found a job which it was a creative job. It involved computers. It was a white collar job, and it was incredibly busy. And and incredibly stimulating. And I was working really hard. It wasn't like there was a lot of downtime at work and I was tired by the end of the day, but it was also like I had mental energy because I wasn't bored in my job. And so what I did in the end was I bought a tiny little Chromebook laptop that was like the size of a book. And I would write on my commute to work on the tram, and then I would write in my lunch hour. And my aim was just 500 words a day. And once I'd done that, I was done. And I designed my life so that I had finished those 500 words by the time I got home from work. And that meant my evenings were free. And so I wasn't like forcing myself at the end of a working day to sit in front of a computer anymore. And I was kind of being really creatively stimulated in my work too, which wasn't like a massive arty job or anything like that. I was doing comms for an aviation company.
Comms as in communication?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
With an absolutely fantastic team who we just got on really well. And it just meant that like instead of sitting in front of a computer and refreshing my emails and kind of having my day drained away by not being stimulated enough, by being stimulated in my job, I then had enough mental energy to write in my free time. And that was how I did the first draft of what became my debut novel. Was like and so I do think that I think a job can help you. And I don't think it needs to be I don't think it needs to be wildly different to writing. I don't think you need to have solely a physical job or not be in front of a computer. I just think it needs to not drain you mentally so that you have enough energy to fit that writing in around it.
Yes. So how does a girl of 8 or 9 years old decide she wants to be a writer? What happened that you said, that's it? Was it a book you had, a story, a movie you had seen? I knew a guy, the author Campbell Black, who said to me one day, and then this was before I even did this podcast, he said that he heard Dylan Thomas on the radio being quoted and said, that's for me. It was just a eureka moment. That's for me. And from then on, he decided he wanted to be and became a successful writer. What was it for you at that young an age?
I don't think I had a specific eureka moment like Campbell Black, but there's a few kind of contributing elements. And one of them is I remember going to the cinema with my parents to see Harriet the Spy when I think I must have been like maybe 9 or 10, and coming home from the cinema and getting out a notebook and writing on the first line, my name is Rosie and I am a spy. And like just needing to be just like Harriet. And similarly, like books like Matilda, where she's just like immersed in reading and books for the whole time. And just I loved reading and I loved books and I loved ghost stories and creepy stories and books about secret passages and mysteries to be solved. I was a very, very big fan of Enid Blyton's Famous Five series, for instance. And like I was desperate to be able to write stories like that. Well, actually, at that age, probably more desperate to live stories like that. But it became an ambition to write them also.
I just love that you bring up Harriet the Spy. That's a book that I came across when I was a kid. And I started carrying a notebook around with me, not even knowing that I wanted to be a writer yet. I guess maybe I had an inkling of that. And I had a person on the podcast earlier this year who brought up Harriet the Spy being a real influence. That's really been an enduring piece of work. So very interesting. So let's talk about your regimen, your writing regimen. Is it morning, midday, evening? Are you still doing a target word count, or are you doing a X amount of time? Talk about that.
Well, it is. I think mornings work best for me. When I had a like a full-time day job, I would do like an hour really early in the morning, like straight after waking up, because I think when you're still kind of half asleep, there's almost like a nice freedom to the way that your brain works, where you haven't really clouded it with your day yet, and you can just kind of let things pour out a little bit without even really monitoring them. So for the first draft process, I find that the early morning brain is a really, really nice place to be. You're not questioning yourself. It just goes down on paper and then you can fix it later, which is just the perfect place to be for a first draft. And I do have I try to write 1,000 words a day. Ideally, 5 days a week or more. But I do usually take the weekends off because I have a 3-year-old, so we've got to be out of bed by like 5 o'clock or whatever, you know. But yeah, so 1,000 words a day, but I do work my writing around other income generating, like writing adjacent things, because I'm not a full-time novelist. So I do editorial work and book coaching and things like that. So what I tend to do, and I plan my days around that kind of thing, is the mornings are for my fiction and then the afternoons are for my editorial business. And that works really nicely. And I can sometimes, if it's a good writing day, I can get my 1,000 words done in an hour, and then the rest of the day is editorial stuff, which is quite useful.
Are you writing in silence, or are you listening to music? Does anything go on around you, or do you want stillness?
Silence, yeah. I'd love to be able to listen to music, but I'd find it too distracting.
So talk about the pros and cons of a word target. You're doing 1,000 words a day. Some days I'm sure it comes more readily than other days. Uh, what are the pros and cons of that?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I like I
Let
think
me just put out there what I see as a potential con, and that
uh,
is that you're writing to a target, you're going slowly, and if you want to really fulfill that target every day, you're committed to that, determined, which you are, Rosie. You've already said determination is a critical what you're doing. That you might start to produce copy that really doesn't cut the mustard. Because you want to get to that 1,000 word count. Not that you're going to keep every word. None of us keeps all of our words. We probably throw out the majority of them. But what about that? There might be another downside to it. But on the other hand, I would think a pro would be I'm productive every day. I don't have to write great stuff every day. What I have to do is get my butt in the seat and get it done.
mm,
And I will have those good days when things really work, and those days when I trash it at the end.
yeah. Oh, I see. I do see what you mean. I think so I think what one of the things that I do like about having a specific target in mind is that you kind of know how long it's going to take you to finish your draft. Like if you're writing 1,000 words a day, 5 days a week, then you're getting 5,000 words a week minimum, usually. Which means that you know when you're going to get to your total word count target, and you can kind of plan your editorial phase based around that. And that's quite handy. I mean, there are days when I sit down at the computer and write 2 words and just say, oh no, not feeling it today. That's not going to happen. But then there are days when I get sat down at the computer and I've written 2,000 words before I've even checked where I've got to. And I think one of the pros of this goal is that I am a better writer if I open my manuscript every single day, and connect with it in some way, because I can remember what I wrote the day before, especially if I reread it a little bit before I start. And it means that there's a continuity there and a kind of flow that is a bit harder to maintain if you're not visiting it every single day. I'm not like some writing advice implies that you can't be a writer if you don't write every day. I completely disagree with that. I think you can. I think my writing is better if I write every day.
Yeah, that's a great point, just having contact with the copy. Because don't you think that when you're writing, or at least you're keeping your writing front and center, even if you're not writing that day, you just simply opened it and kind of refamiliarized yourself with your most recent effort, that it incubates, that in the unconscious mind goes to work on what you're writing and will produce something for you. So maybe it's the next day and you're not simply checking in with it. You're doing your 1,000 words. How big especially as a psychology student, graduate, how big a role do you think the unconscious mind plays?
Oh, massive, massive. How many people do you know, have you heard say that they got they realized the solution to a plot problem that they were having while they were in the shower. Like it happens to everybody. You're like, you got your hands full of shampoo and you're washing your hair, and suddenly, boom, there it is. There's that thing that's been bothering me for weeks. And suddenly, without even thinking about it, you're not consciously thinking about it, you're doing something completely different. The solution just presents itself while you're doing something completely not related to it at all. And that's the subconscious working underneath it all, isn't it? And it's like almost by giving yourself a little break and doing something else, your brain has been working on it in the background without you even knowing. Like I really think the unconscious takes an incredible role in creativity.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. How generous are you with the quality of your output? You're doing your 1,000 words. There are people who say, for instance, what you were saying, that first hour in the morning where you're still kind of in twilight sleep, so to speak, and things flow a little bit more readily. It sounds to me like that internal censor or editor is kind of shut off more so in that first hour than later. But a lot of people say just like Julia Cameron says, lay track, meaning produce copy. It doesn't have to be great, but you need to produce it. But at the same time, if you're going to take that approach, then you have to accept that a lot of this stuff is not going to be the kind of quality that we're looking for. And I likely will have to throw it out at the end or just do a rewrite on it and it's fine. But so my basic question to you is, how generous are you in terms of what you put on paper or on the screen and allowing it to be lousy, being that it's your first draft?
I do let my first draft be a dirty draft, so to speak. It's there are spelling mistakes and kind of things in brackets that say like insert description here and things like that, because I think whatever you have to do to keep up the momentum is very valuable. I do find though that planning in advance so that you know what's happening next helps with the track that Julia Cameron mentioned. You stay on the track because you know where the track is and you've planned it already, which helps me a lot, particularly when kind of my brain is kind of still half asleep, for instance. And then what I do then is when I sit down at my desk for the day, before I start writing, I go to the previous day's words and I reread them. And sometimes I'll make little tweaks and like correct a few spelling errors if they're there, and like make comments in the margins. So I won't do massive rewrites or anything like that, but just make a comment that's like, you might need to fix this in a future draft and things like that. So even at that point, it's still a first draft, but it's had my eyes on it the next day before I start writing my next chunk of words, because also that helps to continue the tone of what we wrote the day before and kind of stops you dropping any kind of continuity elements because you've refreshed your memory about where you left off. And so it means that by the time I get to the first draft, even though I haven't gone back and edited it, and it has been a dirty draft, there has been one editorial run through on it just in the kind of daily chunks. And it helps a lot for it to be kind of relatively clean for when I revisit it to do a rewrite before it goes to my editor.
I like that phrase you use, keeping up the momentum. So making sure you're in contact with your copy is one way to make sure that things are still flowing, or kind of planting the seeds for that. And then you're talking about when you're doing the actual writing, you want to go ahead and allow yourself that dirty draft so that you just keep working. And I like that the dirty draft reference as well, in the putting brackets in there to say, I'm not going to, do this later, but I'm not going to slow down right now. Don't have time to make a pit stop here. Do you have any obsessions? What are you obsessed with?
Oh, what am I obsessed with? Ben Affleck and J-Lo's marriage.
Or former marriage now, I think.
Yeah. What else am I obsessed with? Loads of really weird stuff like that you would not expect from a thriller. I watch a lot of reality television, like Married at First Sight and Love is Blind, and things like that.
Yeah, that's my wife and I watch those. Love is Blind, Married at First Sight. Really interesting. Why do you watch those? What do you get out of those? I mean, I'm curious what your take is on. Does your husband join you in watching those, or is that strictly your viewing?
Oh, he hates them. He like if he walks
Most
in the
men
room
do.
and
I don't know. For some reason, I love them, but what draws you to them? What do you get out of them? Is it sheerly entertainment, or do you also see kind of behavior and interactions that you think you can pilfer for your own writing?
oh, definitely. So both of those things. I love the kind of mindless entertainment of it. And guilt and it feels like a guilty pleasure, but it's not because if ever I kind of find myself feeling a little bit judged by people, I can be like, I've written 5 books. Like, come on, everyone needs to relax. But also, like I do find them the characters, they're real people I know, but they feel like characters. They're interesting people, and I like to armchair diagnose them all with things. Like, I like to text my friend if she's watching the same show and like kind of exchange views. But going back to your initial question of obsessions, I am obsessed with the idea of behind the scenes in these shows. I would pay so much money for a documentary that showed us the conversations that the producers have with the contestants in these shows and how they manipulate these people into doing what they want them to do for the maximum drama. But also from a perspective of like what draws me to them, I am really interested in the storytelling elements of it. And like there's an editorial team behind these shows and they have access to an enormous amounts of footage and then they make the stories from this footage. And they're kind of guided by the people taking part in the shows, but they also have agendas and they also have need an arc for each episode and an arc for the season, and they need a villain and they need heroes, and they are really finessing real life events into these templates so that they can tell these stories. And the ability to generate drama and amplify drama and add drama to existing situations is really impressive and interesting, and from a storytelling perspective I think quite inspiring. And I think if you watch these things with that in mind, you know, oh wow, they've added in a new like the producers have added an extra obstacle here for this couple, and now we're gonna see how they're gonna get through it. And like there's something very informing about that from a writer's perspective, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you that I'd love to know behind the scenes what kind of organization they do, what kind of input they give to the participants. And that there is a tremendous amount, I think, of the footage that they get, and then they're able to do editing to create that story or story arc that you're talking about. And they say that when somebody's got a camera on you, you forget it after a while. You start to just act like there's no cameras at all because they're around all the time. So people start acting naturally, and they have arguments, and they have, all kinds of things happen that you would think I would never do that in front of a camera. Well, you forget the camera's even there. So yeah, it's a really interesting process they must go through, and they don't share the behind the scenes stuff with us really very much. Too bad for that. Um, was there a turning point in your writing career where you really, I don't know, there could have been a revelation for you. It could have been a mentor, or it could have been just from amount of uh, the amount of experience you had that there was a breakthrough of some kind. Did you ever sense a turning point, or was it a long, steady progression?
Yeah, I think the turning point for me was after I finished after I finished writing what was the kind of initial draft of Secrets of Serial Killer, my debut. Um, I then went out on submission to literary agents, and my now literary agent Charlotte um wanted to read the full manuscript and then eventually wanted to have a phone call. And she, in that phone call, basically said, like, how open are you to editorial input on this book? And because I'd done the Masters in Creative Writing and that had involved quite a lot of workshopping with our classmates and like a lot of editorial feedback and giving and receiving was really useful, and I'd found it to be probably the most important element of that course. Um, I was so comfortable with editorial feedback that I was absolutely like, yeah, please, like if you would like to give me editorial feedback, I would be very interested in implementing it on this draft. And she signed me straight away. And I hadn't realized that I think I think agents and editors really appreciate writers who are open to feedback and who aren't massively precious about their work. And I certainly was just like, yeah, rip it apart. Let's see what we can do. Let's make this the best book it can be. Like, and of course, like I got her suggestions then and cried, because what you really want is someone to say, this is the best book I've ever read. It's perfect. Don't change a thing. And of course, they're never going to say that. And she didn't. And she had a load of suggestions, and all of them sounded absolutely crazy to me. And so I had to sit on them for a while and think about it and like work out what exactly she was suggesting, so that I could then take her suggestions and kind of make them feel like they fit the book that I wanted to write, not somebody else's book, you know? And so we worked together really hard on making what had been essentially like a really structureless draft of a book into something that had a real shape and pace. And I learned, like, kind of partially through Charlotte's guidance about her understanding of the genre and the market and what publishers were looking for, and also through my own research about structure and about how to make a book, and ended up completely rewriting the book and pushing it into a structure and making sure that it was coherent and that it had twists and turns, because I don't think it even really had any twists at that stage. I didn't really know how to write a twist. So yeah, working together with my agent for definite on that debut taught me so much about writing a book that has carried forward into the rest of my career and every book that I have subsequently written. And I owe a lot to her and her kind of guidance at that stage in my career.
Well, and I notice from your website that you now do that for other writers. You have what you call editorial services. Talk about that. How do you work with aspiring fiction writers?
I work at a number of different stages depending on where the writer is. So I offer structural or developmental edits, which is like big picture editorial guidance. So like reading through their manuscript and giving them feedback on things like plot and pace and structure, characterization, voice, style, things like that. And doing that with completed novels for them. And then I also offer copy edits and line edits and proofreads. So for writers that are a little bit further down the road and who feel that their story is completely fixed and they don't need any assistance on that, then it's like sentence level feedback and checking for consistency, so that you've got to making sure that the character who's got blue eyes on page 13 still has blue eyes on page 75, you know, that kind of thing. And then I also offer book coaching services where I will meet with a writer on a regular basis, usually through Zoom, and having read a predetermined chunk of their extract of what they're working on, we will then discuss it and I'll give kind of suggestions and feedback. And almost it's like a guided novel writing course, almost like kind of giving them feedback that they can implement and making sure that their novel stays on track with where they wanted it to go.
So you work with them as they go.
Yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah.
So what if they're a science fiction writer or they write literature? Do you say, well, that's not my channel? Or do you say, hey, writing is writing and, you know, story structure is story structure, and you would work with anybody who's writing fiction in any kind of channel?
I am quite specific with the genres that I'll work with, because I have industry knowledge about psychological thrillers and I read a lot of rom-coms and romance. So I feel like I understand what the market wants in those genres and what might get, say for instance, someone's pursuing a traditional publishing route, what might get an agent's attention or what might attract a book for an editor. But if I was to be if a writer had written a sci-fi novel, and I don't really read sci-fi, and I certainly wouldn't know what is fashionable in that genre right now and what's selling, and I wouldn't feel that I was the best editor for that person. Mm-hmm. So I would politely decline that job, not because I don't enjoy their writing, but just because I don't think I can give them the best editorial feedback that they deserve.
Right, right. So I noticed that your books, My Husband's Ex, published this year, 2024, but also was The Baby Monitor also published in 2024?
Yes, yeah. The Baby Monitor came out in February and My Husband's Ex came out in May.
Wow, those are rapid fire. So how they land so close together? Is there a story behind that?
So the publisher who published those two, Bookouture, they're an imprint of Hachette. They are really, really interesting, and I really admire the way they work. They're very data driven, and they observe trends in the way that readers buy books. And one of the things that they respond to is what's going to get readers to buy more books. And what they said with The Baby Monitor and My Husband's Ex is that what they wanted ideally was for someone to finish The Baby Monitor and immediately see that I had another book coming out and go and pre-order that one, and kind of develop a momentum and a kind of solid reader base from because those books were coming out in such quick succession. And I think it's a really interesting approach. And also it's similar to like if you speak to readers who read series, and quite a lot of readers who read series, they say that they don't start book one until they know that the series is finished. And I think there's an element of like readers want to know what they're reading next and when it's going to be out. And perhaps that, and I think they were testing whether that worked with standalone books as well as series. And initially, actually, My Husband's Ex was meant to come out just a month after Baby Monitor, but they moved it back a couple of months, just for various publication reasons. But yeah, they were really, really testing the close succession with that one.
Mm. Do they feel like it was a success, or is it too early to determine that?
I don't know. I haven't asked to follow up, but what I have heard since is that they don't feel that standalones necessarily need to be in that close succession. So I'm wondering if maybe they've looked at the data and it didn't make that big an impact, maybe.
Gotcha. So what are you working on now, Rosie?
I've just finished my fifth book, which is I don't know how much I can talk about it, but it's full of big twists and turns, and it opens with a dead body. And I'm very, very proud of it. This is the first writing experience that I've had where I reread my book before I sent it to my editor, and I was like, this isn't bad. I like this. And like normally by this stage of writing, I'm just like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever written. But this time it hasn't been like that. And I won't be like, it won't always be like this. So I'm just relishing this feeling of like, I've written a book that I quite like this time. It will change. My feelings about that book will change as soon as the first NetGalley reviews roll in. But for now, it's quite nice to be in that place.
So you feel like you in terms of your writing, you've peaked, not peaked with this one, but your writing, the quality of your writing hit a new high with this one that you're about to come out with. Can you say the title, or are you supposed to keep that under wraps?
At the moment it's called The Bride's Secret, but I think it might change. You know, your publisher can change that at any point, even just before publication if they want to. But that's what it's called right now. And I wouldn't say that I've peaked or that my writing is better than ever. I think it's just that some books come easier than others, and this was one that was a pleasure to write.
Interesting. Now, let me finish by asking you how you think your writing will change as you get older. You're still a young woman. As you age, do you have any thoughts or insights as to how you think your writing will evolve?
I've already seen it evolve quite a bit, and it's been really interesting. Like I certainly, like I mentioned earlier, don't want to write about serial killers. I think I'm becoming softer as I get older, and things that I used to find fascinating now, if they're deeply unpleasant, I don't particularly want to spend time with them. And I'm wondering if, as I get older, maybe my stories might become a little bit kinder and nicer. Maybe one day I'll write a rom-com. Or maybe like my characters will I think there's a really, really nice subset of psychological thrillers where, yes, think horrible things are happening to people, but they're good people, and like maybe the moral dilemma fiction.
Not so
Like
horrible. So your writing will get, and your storytelling will get softer or gentler with time.
quite possibly. I
Quite
think that's
possibly.
the
Okay.
trend that I've observed so far, is that, people aren't being hacked into pieces anymore in my books. They're and maybe there'll be happy endings more frequently. You never know.
Well, and with your first one, Secrets of a Serial Killer, you said, I don't think I'll ever write again about a serial killer. You kind of move past that. So very interesting. And then beyond that, do you already have an idea for your what would it be, your seventh one beyond that one? Beyond the
Um,
brides?
so the one after the Bride's Secret would be my sixth one. That one's already plotted, so I'm just kind of reviewing the chapter plan for that one now.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then the seventh one after that, I've just ideas at the moment, just kind of one line emails to myself sitting in my drafts folder on my inbox.
Very good. Our guest has been Rosie Walker from Edinburg, Scotland. She's the author of psychological thrillers. Her newest is My Husband's Ex. It's out there now. It's in print, ebook, and audio edition. Rosie Walker, thank you for coming on the program. Really appreciate your time and your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really nice to talk with you, and your questions were fantastic. I really, really, my brain has been working in overdrive. It's been great.